Welcome, everybody. We'll give you a minute or so to roll in. We're expecting a full house tonight.
Get comfy, everybody. Get comfy, our Beacon people. We like to ask a lot of times we do these presentations for folks all over the country and really the world. We're pretty diverse geographically, and we oftentimes ask where you at. So I think we know for the most part you guys are in New York City, but what borough you live in? Tell us where you are in the city. And yeah, we got you surrounded a little bit here. I'm just north of Boston, back in the on-campus days. I would always look forward for my trip to Manhattan to be on. I was even at, this was before your guys' time, the old Beacon School, before you guys moved into that new facility. I don't know, it was probably at least 6 years ago now, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. A lot of Brooklyn folks, yep, and Manhattan folks. We got Peggy, the fairy godmother of financial aid, out there on the West Coast, outside of Seattle, my partner in crime, and then Kevin Murphy, just south of you guys, in New Jersey. So you guys are pretty well represented
Yeah, we
here.
got Murph here. He's covering the Q&A because I love you guys in the past. You guys are firing those questions as we're doing intros, and it's just nonstop, which I actually love. So
We brought in
we had to bring in extra staff to handle all your wonderful questions. So
That's the hope, right? I mean, the hope is something that we say every day because it's true. Is we're gonna obviously be talking at you for the most part tonight and helping you have a good understanding of, number one, how this whole process works. Number two, and this is a little bit of the harder part, but I think we can get there. How's it going to work for you, right? If you're eligible for financial aid, what does that mean for your family? If you're not, what does that mean for your family? Well, we want you to ask your questions, right? A great part about this thing being virtual now, as fun as it was to be in person, you can ask as specific a question as you want, right? You have a personal question, you can be anonymous, right? Do us a favor, please put it in the Q&A because that's where we'll be living. These will be recorded. So for those of your buddies that couldn't make it tonight, they'll get the recording. They'll also benefit from the Q&A. So without further ado, let us do some quick introductions. My name is Matt Carpenter. I'm a founder of College Aid Pro. This is my 20th season that I've been on the front lines, guided families through this process, which is pretty wild to say. And I want to say I think it's the 16th year that we've been partnering with Beacon, which again is pretty amazing with Deb and Dara in the office. As you guys know, you're in very, very good hands there. But this is what we do is try to create transparency around this whole overwhelming, complex financial part of the process, right? And have that hopefully layer in with the admissions piece. So that's our goal, is that you leave here with a understanding of where you're at right now and just have some action items of like, okay, here's what I do now. I think the hardest part is just like getting started, right? And we're going to get you there. So again, Peg Keogh, the director of education for us, and Peggy, if you want to say hi quick, we'll go from there.
yeah. Happy to be here. I'm not gonna repeat everything Matt said, but I agree with all of it. But kudos to you for being here because understanding this process is you will have such a leg up if you you got to understand the sandbox you're playing in here, and a lot of it is kind of counterintuitive, and then we throw in we're still in a new FAFSA rollout year number 2, so there's just a lot. So follow along with us, and being here tonight will give you that great foundation. So kudos for being here, and we will do our best to make this fun. And I know your eyes will be open to some of the stuff that we show tonight. So
And challenge Kevin there in the Q&A. He's been doing this for an awful long time. And again, I'm not being disingenuous. I literally said this Beacon crowd always asks a ton of questions, a ton of great questions. They're educated folks. They're astute. They're all over this, and really value education. So I said, why don't you join us? Because sometimes Peg and I just can't get to all of them. So challenge them in there, put them to the test. But Kevin, anything you want to do to introduce yourself, or should we get into it, pal?
No, everyone, glad to be here. I don't want to repeat everything, but yes, please, challenge me with the Q&A.
yeah, and we'll do, Kevin will do his best to answer everything. If you ask, he might respond if you ask a very specific question that we really need to know all about you to answer. he's going to let you know. And we're not trying to be evasive. It just is what it is. Sometimes we need to sit down with you in a meeting to answer. And yes, this is being recorded because we always get that question. So if you get distracted or you want to show it to somebody else in your household, you will get the recording. So you don't have to worry about that. So let me share my screen here. So this is who we are. I'm assuming we probably have some new people on here. So Matt said he was a co-founder. He's co-founder of College Aid Pro. And this truly is our mission to end the student debt crisis by empowering you to shop smarter for college and I'm the director of education. Doing educational events is a huge, huge part of this because like I said before, you've got to be an informed consumer to be able to effectively support your child and move through this journey basically. And there we are, the three of us. Everybody should have gotten an email earlier today encouraging you to set up your free MyCap account. So Matt's going to put the link in the chat. We can see that a lot of you already did, so that's great. But if you haven't, strongly encourage you to do that. Just create a username and password. There's a few onboarding questions, and then you'll be on your dashboard. And it's really powerful because in a few minutes, I'm going to be talking about student aid indexes and what they are and how they're calculated. And you'll be able to actually see our estimates of both of yours. So you'll be able to listen to what we're saying tonight. And then actually, to Matt's point earlier, be able to see, okay, that's how financial aid works. And that's where I fit at this school or this school. So you'll be able to see it in real time. So definitely go in there and take care of that. It really doesn't take long at all. You can put in 3 schools, you get your SAIs, it gets you going in this whole process. So let's take a couple minutes and just talk about financial aid in general. Like, how does it work? The biggest takeaway is that all of these colleges are discounting their sticker price. They're discounting what we call their cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is tuition and fee, room and board, books, travel, personal expenses. As we all know, it's been going up for decades. You have no control over that. But it's irrelevant. And Matt's going to show you some samples, a single family in a few minutes that you're going to see. That's one of those counterintuitive things. You know, there could be a $95,000 school, but you never want to take a school off your list based on the cost of attendance. You want to understand what your net cost is. So how are these schools doing this? They're doing it in 3 different ways. They're offering need-based grants, which the name basically tells you you're going to have some sort of financial need, and that can come from the federal government, the grants, your state, but most of it's going to be what we call institutional grants. So that's coming from the different colleges and universities. It's their endowment money. So they're meeting, you have financial need, they're meeting some of it with free money. We all know free money is great, right? Second bucket is also free money. So that's merit-based scholarships. It's not dependent on your finances. It's dependent on your child. What are their grades and test scores? Are they an athlete? Some schools will reward that. Do they have music talent? Whatever it happens to be, that's another form of free money. And again, that comes from the colleges and universities, from their endowment money. It's just given for a different reason. So ideally, you want to maximize those 2 buckets to get the most discount off of the cost of attendance. And then the third bucket, self-help, it's not a bad bucket. It's a part of a lot of family strategy, college funding strategy, and that's fine. But it's loans and work study. Work study is a need-based aid from the federal government. Your child has to get a job. They get a paycheck. You decide how you're going to put that toward the cost of college if you are. And then, of course, loans are loans. You know, you take them out and you've got to pay them back eventually. So loans aren't necessarily bad. Of course, everybody would prefer not to have loans, but reasonable amount of loans. So that can be part of the mix, but you really do want to maximize the first 2 buckets. So let's take a few minutes, and I always forget that I have this slide in here every time, Matt. Okay, so look here. This is an actual example of discounts because, you know, I'm telling you there's these discounts. It's not rare. It's pretty much more the norm than the exception. So let's look at this. So we have a public school. I live in Washington, as Matt said, so University of Washington. private school is Gonzaga out in Spokane. So if you look at these costs of attendance, Gonzaga is more than double, right? So it's easy for a family to say, we can't afford that. Almost 80,000 times 4 plus inflation. You do the math, it's crazy, right? But let's look at what happened for this student when they actually got their awards. This family has a student aid index, an SAI, which I'll talk about in a minute, of 30,000. So let's look at what the student actually was expected to pay at the end of the day once they got their award letter. University of Washington was the same amount. I'm not taking loans out of this bottom number. So the student was offered loans. That's it. So they're paying full price, basically. At Gonzaga, look at the difference there, $40,000. So it went from 76,700 to 40,000. It's still more, but it's a very different delta, right? So this is a very different conversation for a family to sit down and say, well, at 77, that's not going to work for these reasons, but at 40, that can work. So, and so we're just here to tell you this happens all the time. This is what you need to understand as you're building the college list. And that's what you're here now to learn about. So let's talk about the need-based aid, those need-based grants that were on the left on the slide that I showed. Very simple equation that the colleges use. They take their sticker price, that cost of attendance, they subtract the student aid index and the old term for it, if you have older kids, this is going to ring a bell, expected family contribution. And I actually added this back into the slide because a group of schools that require a second financial aid form that I'll talk about in a few minutes are using this terminology, but think of it as the same. The cost of attendance minus SAI or EFC gives you your need. So when that's what gets calculated, this middle bucket is what gets calculated when you submit financial aid forms. And this is what the colleges think you can afford to pay for a year of school. And most parents, when they see it, they say, oh, that's for all 4 years what they think. And we have to say, no, you need to multiply that by 4. And most parents are shocked by that number. So let's do an example, 80,000 cost of attendance. You've created your MyCap account. Go look over there on the top. There's an FM, a federal SAI, and an institutional. You subtract the cost of attendance, 80,000 from that number. Say yours is 50. That's 30,000 of need. Say your SAI is 150,000. Then you obviously don't have any need. So that need-based aid bucket is not going to be applicable to your family. But what I want to explain is it's not all or nothing. There, depending on your situation, you can have some schools where you have need and some schools that you don't. So you really want to dig into that. So let's talk about the SAI and just high level what makes it up. Yeah, that wasn't very eloquent, but what's part of the calculation, I should say. All right, so basically there's 2 buckets. There's assets and there's income, and it's student assets and parent on both sides, okay? So let's talk about assets first. The big takeaway here is no retirement account. So if you've been a great saver, you got a great 401k, 403b, pensions, Roth IRAs, those are all retirement accounts. That's one of the biggest mistakes that people make, and I get it. It's confusing, right? They're saying assets. Well, that's a big asset I have. Do not put retirement accounts on the FAFSA. It's just not part of the calculation, which is lovely. It shouldn't be. But everything else almost is on the table. So that means stock portfolio, bond portfolio, CDs, checking and savings, 529s, their college savings accounts. If you've been fortunate enough to be able to save in a 529 and you own it as the parent, it's an asset of the parents and it's part of your net worth of investments. That's the terminology that they use, which is confusing to some people. What the heck do they mean? Net worth of investments. That's what they mean. All of your non-retirement assets. So if a parent owns a 529, that's going to be part of that question. If grandma and grandpa own a 529, that's not even in the mix. So do not put that on the FAFSA. They're not in the household. I've never seen, knock on wood, a 529 where the student owns it. The student is the beneficiary and the parents or other adults are the owner. So that's very important because Student assets are assessed much higher when they calculate this SAI than parents. So that can really hurt your SAI if you make that mistake. So keep that in mind. If your kids have custodial accounts, that's different from a 529. So you see where that says UGMA and UTMA, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, Uniform Gift to Minors Act. That's what it stands for. If your child has one of those, that is an asset of theirs. And there are strategies to move that out of their name. And that's something you would want to talk with us one-on-one on, because some people, it makes sense to do it. Sometimes it can sting you over here if you do it. So you got to be really careful. You can't just make that decision willy-nilly. If you have jointly owned accounts with your child, which is common for minors, you can put that in your bucket. And then last but not least, real estate. The primary home, the home you live in, if you're not renting, the equity in your home, most colleges are not going to look at that. Matt's going to touch on it in a few minutes, and I will too, that there are a group of schools that will. The key takeaway on all real estate is don't overvalue your real estate. You don't want to lie. You need to be honest, but you need to find the lowest defensible value, and then you can even reduce it from there. So that's a planning opportunity to keep in mind. So all of these pieces are part of the asset piece. Assets are literally assessed the day you hit submit on the form. So if you're super organized and you have your whole portfolio linked to a program that updates close of business, you can go on there and look at what your portfolio is worth and pop that on the FAFSA. It literally is that day. I don't think most people are that exacting, but it gives you time. If you're listening and saying, man, we've got all this money and we need to buy a new car and we need to do some stuff, you have some time to do that. So that's how the real estate, that's how the asset piece works. Now we want to talk about the other side of the SAI, and that's income. Parental income is by far the biggest contributor to SAI, okay? Student income is assessed at 50%, but most students don't make a lot of money. And if you see over here on the right, there's an income allowance for kids that's over $11,000 for the 25-26 school year. So most kids, even if they work, they're not making over that. So it's a wash. But for parents, it's based on adjusted gross income. And if you make a nice living, I understand it stings a bit for financial aid, but I'm a financial planner by background. And believe me, it's to make a nice living, take a deep breath and feel grateful and fortunate about that. It might make your it will make your SAI higher. But the year that is assessed is not a real time like the assets. It's actually a 2-year look back, and we call that prior year, PPY. President Obama put this into place a while back. So you can see over here on the left, the easiest way to remember is whenever your child's going to school. So if you have a senior, they're going this coming fall, 2025, subtract 2, that's your tax year. So when these forms go live, everything's going to be about 2023. So that's in the rearview mirror, like it's done, right? There might be some things that you need to appeal on, but you can't do anything about it, right? You can't change it. We are still in 2024, so keep that in mind. Don't do things that inflate your income that you can control. Capital gains, taking distributions from a 401k that maybe you don't need, just again, as I said earlier, being an informed consumer helps you in this process. So that's how it goes. If you have a junior, you can see you're in the tax year that matters. If you have a sophomore, you're not there yet. So you know now about your what we call base year 2025. Okay. So that's how the SAI is calculated. So as I said earlier, if you're looking at your MyCap dashboard and you're seeing pretty high SAIs along the top where we show you the 2 estimates, and you're not eligible for need-based aid, let's just say hypothetically anywhere, then where do you turn? If you can't afford 90, 95,000, soon to be 100,000 a year, or honestly, you don't want to pay it, which I totally get as a parent, I would not either, then what do you do for these discounts? And that's where that middle bucket comes in, that I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He's going to go through that.
Okay, I think you want to take this one. I think
Did we
Matt,
lose him?
I
Okay.
think we lost
We
Matt.
will. hold off on that. I'll keep
Yeah.
going here. Okay, so let's remember that middle bucket that we talked about. That's merit scholarship. So not based on finances. So we can put that over there for a minute. So let's talk about merit. Merit is a wonderful thing because merit awards are almost always guaranteed for all 4 years as long as the child maintains a certain GPA. And it's not 4.0. It really, it depends on the school. Like it could be a 3.2 or a 3.3. They just want to make sure kids are doing well in college. Now, we every year, ever since I started doing this with my own business before I joined CAP, I have parents that are like, why should I? You want to jump in, or you want me to finish this slide and then you can pop in, Carp?
What a disaster, Peggy. I was texting
I
you
don't know
earlier.
what you're doing over there. It's not time to get a drink of water, buddy. Okay.
I, s- I said, I was texting you saying you're a little choppy. Next thing you know, I can't get on the internet. So I think we landed on our feet here, but go ahead and finish, buddy. Or
Okay.
I'll talk about the competing colleges
Okay,
whenever
all
you.
right, great. I'll kick it over to you then. So basically, every year we get parents from my neighbor said not to submit the forms. It's a waste of time, yada yada. There are many reasons to submit the forms, but the relevant one to this slide is some schools require it to receive merit aid. So if you don't want to leave 5 figures, which that's what we're talking about, 5 figures a year is typically a merit award. It can be $20,000. You don't want to leave an $80,000 discount on the table for your child and for your pocketbook. Submit those forms. Just do yourself a favor and submit the forms. The other thing about merit aid to realize, and this is going to put you up here, you got a leg up because you're on this webinar. There are certain schools, quite a few, that do not give merit scholarships. No child on that campus is walking around with a provost or a dean scholarship. That's not part of their business plan, right? So the Ivies, the Stanfords, NESCACs, the Amherst, Middlebury, Bowdoin, all those kind of schools, they just don't do it. So if you have a child that has a 4.0 unweighted and got perfect SAT scores, that's all awesome. And that is going to really help them in many ways. But I always get these questions. Well, can I appeal for merit at Princeton? No, because they don't give merit. Like they're not going to give you your child merit award. So that doesn't mean they shouldn't be on the list, but realize if you don't have need-based eligibility and you're not going to get merit awards, you're writing a full check or you're looking for other ways to fund that. And there are other ways to do that. But that's a key thing to, put in your head because a lot of parents go through this process and realize that too late. All right, I'll kick it over to you.
No, 100%, and especially to a school like Beacon with so many high achieving students, that's relevant, right? Your kids are getting into these institutions, right? The last bullet point I'll focus on before I grab the wheel is applying to competing colleges, right? I mean, colleges are $100,000 a year now, right? $100,000 a year. Okay. Yes, we're talking about investing in an education and that's a beautiful thing. But this is like a major business transaction in a lot of ways too. And that's not a bad thing to have that mentality. As a matter of fact, we think it's an advantage, right? Any other investment you make of this magnitude, there's always some type of negotiation, right? We're not going to accept that first offer when we go to, turn in our leased car, or we're going to buy a home, or, whatever it happens to be. All these major investments, we want to see what we can do to make them a little bit more palpable. The same applies here. I'm going to tease that a little bit more at the end, but how we're setting ourselves up for success is right now, as we are kind of starting or maybe finalizing our list of colleges. We always emphasize that you have to have competing schools on your list, especially if you're not eligible for need-based aid, right? It's a relevant strategy for everybody, but especially if you're not eligible for need-based aid. So I'll use an example that came up just in conversation earlier this week. We had somebody that just, from a different area of the country was coming to tour schools in Boston. They loved Northeastern because they really liked the fact that it had a little bit of a campus setting. They really liked the co-op deal, right? They hated BU, right? Obviously a world-class institution as well, but they didn't like, if you guys have ever been to BU, I'm sure a lot of you will come visit. I know it's popular for for a lot of folks down there, but it's kind of built into, it's a very urban setting, right? It's almost built into our city's landscape there. And some folks love that, others don't, right? So they said, hey, look, we're all in on Northeastern. We're not going to apply to BU. I said, oh, yes, you are, right? Because they are direct competitors. And we know there's no leverage, or we know there's no possibility that you're going to attend BU, but we are going to use that acceptance and that award as leverage, which is going to majorly maximize our odds of getting more money out of Northeastern, right? And obviously that example would work both ways, and that happens with all kind of comparable schools. So it's an important part of the process that, in my opinion, doesn't get enough publicity. And Peggy, if I could, I'll just share my screen and we can bring some of these concepts that we both talked about together here. So like we said at the top, it's great to see that most of you already created your account. So as Peg was going through that, cost of attendance minus SAI equals need, you know what your SAI is, right? And just to confuse you further, there's actually two different types of SAIs, right? It's colleges that just require the FAFSAs, so your SUNY Binghamtons and your U Marylands and your UC Boulders, all these types of schools only require the FAFSA, right? So they're using this federal methodology. We have schools like Columbia, NYU, and BU and Northeastern that I mentioned. These schools, in addition, will require something called the CSS profile. But they're using essentially a different formula, and it's very common for there to be a range within this institutional formula for a few reasons. And it applies to this family specifically. Number one, this family, they own their primary residence. They have a meaningful amount of equity in their primary residence. Number two, they're divorced. This is a split household family, right? When you're a split household family, the federal formula, and Peg's going to spend some time going in detail talking through this because it can get a little bit confusing. But in short, they only look at one household. Okay, so if a college just requires the FAFSA, they only look at one household, and it's as if that other parent or parents don't exist. Okay, whereas schools that use the institutional formula, most of them will look at both households, right? Most of them will look at home equity to varying degrees. Now, in a lot of ways, I'm telling everybody more than they need to know, and maybe overwhelming with information. Everything I shared, everything Peg shared, it's built into the algorithm here in the platform. That's why we always emphasize, we want you to understand how this works, but you need to understand how it's going to work for you. And this is a great example, right? So this is a New York City family. Okay, and you can see here's what Columbia is going to be next year, right? $100,000. But guess what? It's going to be a lot more affordable than NYU, even though the sticker price is comparable. Why? Well, NYU looks at home equity. They think it's completely fair game. Obviously, in the $100,000 institution is going to be about the same exact price as the $30,000 institution. Now, this isn't. I wouldn't use this case study if it was a complete anomaly, right? This is a family with average income, average resources. Yes, they're split household, but again, that's about half of the households, right, in our country. And they're homeowners with a meaningful amount of equity, which is very common for you all that own your property in New York City. And I think, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges of where you all live, a little bit lesser of extent for Peg and myself and Kevin, although we still live in expensive areas of the country, it's not New York City, right? And one of the biggest, I think, inherent flaws with this formula is that they really don't account for a cost of living. Right? They look at your $300,000 household income for a family 5 in New York City, the same way that they would if you lived in, suburban Des Moines, Iowa, right? Which again, I don't need to tell you, is just a different lifestyle, and those folks that live out in those areas of the country have more means to save with those with that income level. And the other thing is just home values, right? Property values where you live. So that's why it becomes so important to know, well, which colleges are going to consider my home equity? How do I make sure that I value it in such a way that we're not getting crushed, right? And when they are looking at that. So again, just make sure that you understand where you guys are at kind of on this whole spectrum. And I think this is a great example too, because a lot of families that are really price sensitive, right? They're really conscious about the affordability of this major investment. and their strategy is to just apply to state schools. Okay. That can backfire. Okay. That can backfire. Not for everybody, but this is a great example where if you have all state schools on there, especially out of state schools, right, those are going to be your most expensive options. But let's do something. Let's take a closer look at some of these schools. Let's actually put into the chat some of the colleges that you guys are considering. What's the top choice? Where are you thinking about going to ED? You know, what's your alma mater? We'll actually look at a couple of these, and you guys can get a better idea of how generous they are in terms of financial aid, scholarships, etc. So Vassar was the first one that I saw. Okay, so again, Vassar is one of these schools that they're generous with need-based financial aid, so we're going to get a big discount here, but they look at home equity, right? So that's something that's really still making this college pretty expensive. Now, if I want to click on Vassar or any school, I can it's going to drill down, you know, why are we getting a discount? Is it grants? Is it scholarships? If we want to see, well, why are we getting, you know, $52,000 in scholarships? I can click on this financial aid tab and it's going to tell me, okay, well, they meet 100% in need. Okay, well, they're one of these schools that uses the institutional formula, so that kind of makes sense in terms of why they're looking at home equity. So again, telling you more than you need to know, but I also think it's hopefully helpful to as you guys are finalizing or putting this list of schools together. Clark University up in Worcester, that's how we say it up here. But if we want to look at Clark, okay, again, same thing. Now, another thing I want to point out, for every college in the country, we have every scholarship that they offer, the qualifications for each, and we're really good at projecting, you know, how much is your kid actually going to get here, if anything. So I think I saw Ithaca might be a good one for
Yeah,
some.
I see was on there twice. Yeah.
Okay. So here's Ithaca, where, you know, yes, we're getting need-based grants, but this family is also going to get his scholarships. It's incredibly rare you'll get both. So that's why the net cost is not reflecting both. But if this family hadn't had an SAI of 150,000, so in other words, regardless of the family's household income, they're going to get a $23,000 scholarship at Ithaca. And we can look down again and get more context, or 21,000 as to the why. Okay, so here's the requirements or whatever it might be at that particular school. So hopefully that gives you an idea. And then just the last thing I want to just show you really quickly is that as, again, you guys are finalizing this list of schools, you can put in some of your admissions criteria. I know that's where you're really working, you know, with the guidance with your school counselors in the college counseling office on. But if you want to put some criteria to say, hey, we want to stay close to home, we want a small school, here's what we're thinking about majoring in, anything that's important to you. But then you can just go sort based on who's going to give you the most in scholarships, right? So maybe you guys haven't been talking about Gettysburg, but if they're going to give you 37,000, maybe let's take a drive, right? Let's go take a look. Or if you just want to sort based on financial aid because the platform said you were eligible for financial aid, same deal, right? So, you know, maybe again, we weren't thinking about Barnard, but geez, they're great with financial aid. Let's take a closer look. So again, hopefully that's helpful, but our goal again kind of goes back to that. Transparency is if we have to, is kind of a very common word and theme for us, and just trying to make sure that you guys are eyes wide open even before you're actually getting offers from these schools.
All right, so now let's get into nitty gritty of, you know, the fun financial aid forms here, right? So the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, almost every school in the country requires the FAFSA. And then I'll talk about a second form in a few minutes. If you have not been living under a rock, I'm sure you've heard about the FAFSA rollout last year for the 24-25 school year. They did what they were calling the simpler FAFSA. It didn't end up being simpler. It will be simpler at some point once they get the tech down, but it was a bit of a train wreck last year. So instead of going live October 1, which is typically when this form goes live, they are doing a very intentional slow rollout starting October 1, and they've got 4 different beta groups, and they're going to bring in hundreds, very small number of students and their contributors October 1, And then they're going to slowly increase it mid-October, mid-December, beginning of November, mid-November. And hopefully it will go live for everybody December 1. So you can ask in your counseling office if your high school is part of Beta 1. Odds are it's not, right? Because there's 6 community-based organizations and subsequent high schools and colleges that applied to be part of Beta 1, okay? So probably there's nothing you can do as far as getting into the FAFSA right now. And that shouldn't be a stressor. Everybody's in the same boat. It is what it is, but follow us, we're on Instagram. We've got a private Facebook group. We're doing webinars like this constantly. So follow us. We'll be all over it, and we'll give you the latest, greatest information from the Department of Ed on that. But takeaway here is most likely it's going to be December 1. And again, if you have a senior, it's going to be all about that 23 tax year. You'll have filed your taxes by then, even if you did an extension, and you'll be good to go. So on the FAFSA, if you are divorced or separated, only the custodial parent submits the FAFSA with your child. And the definition of custodial parent is the parent that provided the most financial support on a year look back from when you are submitting the form. It's not based on a calendar year. So that's another planning opportunity. So say it goes live December 1, you're sitting there submitting it December 10th. It's a year look back from December 10th into this whole year and the tail end of last year. So if you're in a situation where you're 50-50 or you're close in how you provide support for your child, sit down and do some planning. We can support you on that. We can help you on that, because it could mean tens of thousands of dollars more money to pick the parent that, following the rules, being honest, actually did provide the most support, but maybe has the lower income and lower assets. So nice little gray area that the government left there when they changed the definition of custodial parents. Only one parent submitting. The one thing that you can do now with the FAFSA is get what's called your federal student aid IDs. So your child who's a senior, or if I'm talking to class of 2025, younger ones, you can go ahead and get it, but it's not really time sensitive. But if you have a senior, have your child go. You want to go to studentaid.gov. You want to create that FSA ID. You're going to create a username and password, some security questions. You're going to have to share your social security number, your date of birth. So make sure you're on studentaid.gov. Information gets sent to the Social Security Administration. They say you are who you are, you're good to go. Don't wait till the last minute. Last year I had several families. They're like, the deadline's coming and I'm not approved yet, Peg. Don't do that to yourself. Just get it done now. So your student needs it, and one parent, typically one parent is what they call a contributor. This is a new word. Doesn't mean contributing money. It means contributing to your child's FAFSA. So if you're married filing jointly, one parent needs to get it. If you're divorced or separated, the custodial parent needs to get it. That's it. And there's a few more rare. If you're married filing separately, you both need to get it. There's a few little nuances in there, but across the board, that's about what it is. Okay. So go ahead and get that done. Check that box. Put that in your password protected password sheet, because you're going to need that every year when you submit the FAFSA. Okay. So that's the FAFSA. I'm going to turn it over to, do you want to talk through this, or you want to, Murph, why don't you take this one? He's going to talk for a few minutes about the New York, your specific plans in New York that you see on the slide here.
Yeah, of course. So I know most of the families here from New York, so I'll skip over New Jersey, even though that's where I am. So for New York, you guys have TAP, and the state aid form in New York. You actually don't fill it out until you know what school your child's going to. So it's limited in terms of what your income can be and the maximum award, but it's important to keep this in mind. And honestly, I would still encourage all families to fill out the TAP, as long as you roughly meet the income that's on the screen. In regards to Excelsior scholarships, there's a higher income allowance for this. This is need-based though. And obviously this only applies to SUNY and CUNY schools. So the private schools that are in New York unfortunately it wouldn't apply to those. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
and any particular questions there, guys, fire away. But the short is for right now that there's no action item here, right? They do want you to sit tight until you know exactly where you're going, and it's pretty black and white. There's not much of a gray area here. There's not much nuance, right? You have to complete the FAFSA, then you're going to complete the specific New York TAP grant, right? Really, this I should say next spring and summertime, assuming you're class 2025, and whatever the form falls out of that formula is what you're going to be eligible for. Right. But just know, especially if you're going to school in state, it's a good program. New York has one of the stronger state programs in the country, no doubt about it.
All right. Now I want to take a minute to talk about the second financial aid form. So this form is called the CSS Profile. It's administered by College Board. So this is the nonprofit that does APs, PSAT, SAT. So I'm sure your child has a login. It's a email address and a password. Okay. Hot off the presses, this form just went live today. They were doing maintenance until 5 Eastern, and hold it up, 5:07. When you go on there, you'll see 2526. So that means it's live. On paper, they go live October 1, but the last few years they've gone live quite a bit early. So it's live, so you can get in there. The schools that require this is about 200, 250. It's not in lieu of the FAFSA, it is with the FAFSA. So you always have to do the FAFSA, and then you will do the CSS profile as well, okay? There's some key differences with this form. Matt talked about, and I talked a little, and then he talked when he was in the software about your home equity, where you live. And I know people in Manhattan have apartments, you have a bunch of equity, it can be quite sizable. The schools that require the CSS profile, most of them look at home equity. Not all of them. He showed you Columbia, right? So that's another planning opportunity. If you're sitting on a lot of home equity and your income's decent, not as much in the way of non-retirement assets, a school that doesn't look at home equity could be massively different than another CSS profile school that does. So just keep that in mind. That's a planning opportunity. If you're divorced or separated, remember on the FAFSA, only one parent is submitting, that custodial parent. That's not the case with the CSS profile. The custodial parent with the FAFSA definition will submit the CSS profile with your child, and then the non-custodial parent will submit a second, it's called the non-custodial profile. They'll submit a second form to College Board. They both go together, they both go together to College Board, but there's privacy. You won't see each other's information. College Board gets it, and then the colleges will see both households. So it stands to reason you could have an SAI that's much higher if you have two sets of, if both parents work, both parents have significant assets or anything like that, right? Okay, so that's a very different scenario. For business owners, and Matt mentioned this, on the FAFSA and the CSS profile, if you're a business owner, they're going to be asking you questions about your business. On the FAFSA, they just ask you the value. And some businesses have zero value. So same talk track of you don't want to overestimate, you want to be honest, right? So that's an area that sometimes people need our help. Like, I don't know how to value my business. What is it? It's this kind of business. We just had a question come in last week or earlier this week on that very question. So business owners, the value, and obviously any income that comes off your business, that's part of your adjusted gross income is going to be in there too. The CSS profile is much longer, much more complex. They have supplemental questions. Some of these schools are asking you what cars you drive. I mean, they go deep, right? So actually this year, if you have kids that require this, you're going to be doing it first because the FAFSA isn't, FAFSA isn't live. So once you get to the FAFSA, if they've got it all rocking and rolling through their beta testing, it's going to be like a dream to do the FAFSA. So One of the other co-founders at CAP, Billy Rabbit, he says, you know, if you're gonna do the CSS bit, you're gonna do the FAFSA, whatever your drink of choice is. If it's wine, for me, it's an espresso martini, whatever it is for you, you get one, you get it done. But with the CSS profile, you might need a couple, right? And I'm speaking to parents here, not any kids, not
21
any
plus.
we do not, that's our disclaimer here. But you know, I'm kidding. But I'm not kidding. It's a bear. It's a bear, and a lot of people have a lot of questions around it, and there's just a lot of pent up stress around the financial aid forms, anyways. But those are the two forms, FAFSA, CSS. The good news is, if you can't sleep tonight, you can get in there and start working on the CSS profile because it's live. But really watch deadlines, because the deadlines for financial aid forms correspond with how your child is applying for admission. Matt's going to touch on that. I think it's the next slide. There's different ways to apply for admission with deadlines, and with financial aid, it's critical that you make these deadlines. So don't submit the forms the day before, because if you get a storm or whatever and you lose connectivity and you miss that deadline, it can be very punitive.
Yeah, and on the other end of that spectrum, just because we get the question a lot, and I think it's a big, a common kind of misconception and myth, especially Peg and I did a presentation for school counselors earlier this afternoon that was focused on the FAFSA updates and things like this. And I think there's a common misconception that whoever gets their applications in first is going to get the most money, and the money's going to run out if you don't get it in early. So that's not true. Okay, that is a myth. Now, you need to make your college's priority deadlines. To Peg's point, if you miss it by a day, you could very well cost yourself an exorbitant amount of money. Do not give these colleges excuses to give you less money, because they're likely going to take you up on it, right? But there's no advantage getting it in, you know, today versus 1 minute before the priority deadline at your schools. Again, I would follow Peg's kind of theme there of don't wait until 1 minute before the deadline. I think that is sound advice, but don't be panicking when you're not in that early batch of folks that can get access to the FAFSA on October 1st, because you're not, right? You're not going to be. And again, if you want to start your CSS profile now, great, but the earliest it's going to be due is November 1st, and that's only if you apply early. A couple other comments on the CSS profile, I guess, in the FAFSA that, for me, just from a meta level here, is that number one, I think the places where there's the biggest margin for error, or the most common mistakes that translate to more money, are split household families, right? Especially with this new rule where there's even more choices that you can make, options and flexibility that you can do in your favor. Business owners, again, to reemphasize, it's just, we see it as one of the most common mistakes is folks overvalue their business now, even on the FAFSA, right? We didn't have to worry about that before last year. And then property owners, whether you have other property or whether you own your primary residence, again, especially in the more expensive areas of the country, that's just a huge swing in whether or not, you know, more colleges fit within your budget. So just something to think about as you guys are tackling this. And for me, the CSS profile, it's not just the volume of questions, right, that makes it annoying and kind of the layout, but there's some nuance involved there, right? Should we answer the questions that we don't have to answer? Which ones? You know, they ask this question that drive families crazy and actually matter, which is, how much can you pay for college each year, right? It's like, you don't want to say too low of a number. Is that going to hurt your kids' chances of getting in? Probably not, is the answer to that question. But could it get the financial aid director? Could it rub them the wrong way? It could, if it's too low. It does, right? These folks are on our team. But if you put too high of a number there, you're going to cost yourself money, right? So these are just some of the things that we'd like to flag, especially as families are going through this the first time. So look, we get this question all the time, so we just like to get ahead of it. And I think generally speaking, we share the same opinion here as a team, and we each have our different talk track around it. If you guys are, and just by way of definition here, so early action just means that you are applying early to colleges. You can apply early action to unlimited colleges, assuming it's not a restrictive early action like a Yale, for example. And you're just accelerating the timeline on this whole thing. You're going to have earlier due dates, but the advantage of that is you're going to find out if you got accepted into the school earlier, and usually, not always, but usually you get your official financial offer earlier. Okay. So there's a lot of great things about going early action. There's some statistics at some colleges that point to a little bit better admissions rates if we go early action. Okay. Early decision is what takes a lot more critical thinking, because this is early decision. We are signing a binding agreement. We're signing it as a student, as the parent, as the school counselor, right? So your school counselors have to put their names and to an extent reputations on the line when they sign these agreements. Okay. And what you're telling that college is, if we get accepted, we're going to attend. We're pulling all our other applications and we're going to go to your school. So before we can sign off on that for families that we collaborate with, first, I said, look, you got to check two big boxes with a lot of confidence. Number one, this has to be your aha dream school for your kid. They were just one of these few kids that said, I need to go to this school. I will do anything to go to the school, and this is where I'm going to flourish, right? So we have to check that box. Number two, it is your responsibility to know about how much this school is going to ask. So you have to put it in the platform and go look at it anywhere else you can find information. Do your homework to say, okay, if we get into Columbia, if we get into Stanford, this is about how much it's going to cost. And we can stare at that number and say, you know what, we're comfortable with that. Okay, we can live with that. If we can't check both of those boxes with a lot of confidence, we're usually advising, let's pause, right? Let's go early action. If we can, have at it. Let's go. So that's how we answer it. It's a really tough question, right? Because it's super nuanced. Depends on the kid, depends on the school, depends on the budget, the whole deal. But that's, hopefully that's helpful if you guys are having some of those conversations at home. And then I guess lastly here, Peggy, again, I just want to plant the seed. We're not going to drill down on this tonight. Obviously, we're approaching top of the hour here. But I just want you to have a mindset, a mentality that again, I kind of teased earlier. At the end of the day, yes, we're pursuing a degree in higher education, but this is also a huge investment. I want you to have an element of a business, mentality as you approach this. And part of it is we're not accepting that first offer, right? We're going to appeal. Now, there's a method to the madness. This is very much a niche way of negotiating, and as one demonstration of that is you can't use the word negotiating. That will almost end, that will really hurt your odds for being successful, even though that's exactly what you're doing. These financial aid counselors are a particular bunch. And again, we're allowed to say that. We know them personally. They're friends of ours. They're on our team. You'll see them on our websites here. But that's kind of the intel we get in being able to look behind the curtain there. But it matters how we go about this. The level of sophistication matters, right? The ammunition that we're using in our appeal matters, right? Should this be through admissions, through financial aid? Both. Should it be parent, student? Both, right? The answers to those questions, there's a huge kind of variation on. But the takeaway is we're not going to accept that first offer, right? And that's something that I would want to leave you with. Now, in terms of your kind of best next steps here, right? If you haven't already, make sure that you create your free account. You should be seeing exactly what these schools are going to cost you guys. Go look for schools that are going to be more cost effective. But what I would recommend is book some time. Now you'll see if you go to book an hour with us on the website, right? It's not free. It's $349. But what I am doing is I'm putting in the chat here. This is an opportunity for you to meet one-on-one with Kevin here. It's for 30 minutes. It's not for an hour, but he can learn a little bit more about where you guys are at right now, answer some of the questions that are just kind of top of mind. So some of the questions, I got one question that was about, should we put more money into paying down our mortgage, right? And that was a perfect example of a question that Peg flagged at the beginning, where I said, I can't answer that question because I would just need to know a bunch more before I'd feel comfortable that I'm giving you the right advice, right? So anyways, and obviously, Kevin, I know a lot of folks wanted to know, well, how do you guys work with families? How do you support families, right? Those are all the questions you can ask, and we'll share all of those details. From a high level, guys, our kind of package, our cute little marketing name here is Wake Me Up When It's Over, right? And that the concept is that we're grabbing the wheel. You know, we're going to be the ones that say, okay, which of these schools are going to give you the best value, right? Whether you're eligible for aid, whether you're not eligible for aid. What can we do, if anything, to become eligible for more aid, right? Usually there's a lot of wiggle room there, not always. What do we do if there's no magic wand? We're not getting need-based financial aid. How do we make sure that we're still not paying full sticker price, right? We worry about the application, so we're going to take care of your FAFSAs, your CSS profiles. We worry about who needs what, where, when, how. We get on the front lines with that appeal part of the process, and then ultimately talk about how do we actually pay this bill. So that's our job. That's a high level description of what we do. But you can ask your particular questions, obviously get into, you know, our fee structure and just see if it's a good fit for you all. And for those of you that it's not, Kevin can let you know just how else you can interface with us. At a minimum, Peg said it at the beginning, just pay attention, right? Continue to follow along with what we're doing. We're going to continue to educate you all. I was going back and forth with Deb Heller today to nail down an October date. Well, we'll talk about, excuse me, the CSS profile and the FAFSA in a more granular way. Excuse me, specifically for your class 2025 folks. But our number one ask would be continue to pay attention, stay engaged, and certainly take advantage of meeting one-on-one with Kevin here, so we can learn a little bit more about you and vice versa. Peggy, what did I miss, my dear? Did I leave anything on the table?
No, you nailed it. You nailed
Kevin?
it. Just keep following along, and yeah, sign up to chat with Kevin. You know, it'll
Hey,
be
Kevin, here's the only
time
thing
well
I'll warn you
spent.
about. Here's the only thing I'll warn you about with Kevin. This might have come through on camera. This guy's like, if you've ever gone on a what do they call timeshare kind of sales pitch, that's Kevin's style. If you can't tell, he's just going to lock the door behind you.
Strap
You know,
in.
so, right, Kevin? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. I think it's
Yeah,
spot on with how we handle our consultations. But
yeah, that comes.
no,
We describe him in-house as actually gentle. He has a very gentle way about him, and it's a very appropriate
I told you before, Peg, everyone calls me soothing. I don't personally get it,
Well,
but
how
that's what
can
I
that
hear
go
from.
wrong?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll take that. I'll take that. So yeah, I think, and if you have a different experience, if you don't have a pleasant experience, you bring that back to us. But I think,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
think,
we are sending out the recording. Somebody just put in, so no worries on that. You will get it. So you arrive late, you'll be good to go. We got you
yeah,
covered.
everybody's gonna get the recording. Our director of education keeps those slide decks in a nuclear vault.
Yes, I do. I do.
Several stories below, somewhere in Fort Knox. So you will not get those slide decks, but you will get the recording, and again, we got a whole bunch of resources outside of the slide decks.
Yeah, we do.
All right, guys. Well, it's always fun to be back at Beacon, and we got a we got off to a slow start tonight, Peggy. I got a little nervous because I'm always hyping.
I know. I was
Beacon,
worried that Murph was going to fall asleep in the Q&A.
They found their.
And
They
it
found
I
their.
got nervous too. I got
Yeah.
nervous too, but thankfully we got some really good questions in the Q&A. Did you guys see that question about missing pre-registration?
Well, so long as you recorded, even if you recorded during it, you will get the recording, and that'll go out tomorrow. Usually goes out in the first half of the day. If by any chance you don't get it, support at collegeaidpro.com. And again, for those that arrived late, I'll share Murph's link again. And obviously for you class 2025 folks, you have to talk to us now. You know,
Don't
the
wait.
26s and 27s, well, although Murph will say don't wait for even the 26s and 27s, but certainly for the 25s, it's we are fully in it. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you. Have a great rest of your night, and maybe one of these days we'll be back there to do it in person again. I always miss coming into town, so hopefully those days are in our future.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Bye bye.